Jim was the first in the family to see it outside of the letter, and it happened that very week. His mother didn't come down for breakfast that morning. When Anne, the housemaid, called him, he turned over in bed and went back to sleep. By the time he finally came downstairs, his father and his little sister Evelyn had already finished their meal, and Anne was clearing the table. Anne wore spectacles, and Jim thought this was why she always looked so stern. "Little boys who are late and don't get up when they're called don't deserve any breakfast," said Anne firmly. Jim never liked to argue with Anne, so he quietly slipped out into the kitchen, where Josephine Catherine, the cook, was just finishing her own breakfast. Jim always thought the kitchen was the nicest room in the house. He liked the warm color of the red bricks behind the stove and the dresser with the blue china dishes on it. He liked the shining row of pots and pans. He liked the bare floor, where one could spill milk or cookie crumbs without anyone saying, "But careful, or you'll spoil the rug." But best of all, he liked the delicious things that came out of the oven. "I've saved some buckwheat cakes for you," said Catherine as she took a yellow bowl out of the oven. She always gave him far more syrup than his mother did, and next to his mother, Jim thought Catherine was the most charming grown-up he had ever known. The postman seemed to like her, too. He often passed by the kitchen window and sometimes stopped for a little chat. "There's a letter from Miss Matilda in Virginia this morning," said the postman in a rather quick, hushed voice. "And it has a black edge all around the envelope, so I'm afraid there's bad news." "I'll take the letter up to Father," said Jim, and the man slipped the mail in through the kitchen window. It was a sunshiny spring morning. Just behind the postman, a lilac bush was beginning to bud, tiny bits of green peeking out that would soon become full leaves. Jim rushed upstairs and burst into his mother's bedroom. His father was sitting there, reading from scraps of the morning newspaper. Jim was sure his mother was the prettiest and sweetest person in the whole world. Her dark hair was rumpled around her forehead and braided into a long plait, just like a little girl's. She was propped up in bed with pillows and wore the loveliest pink morning robe Jim had ever seen. A tray sat in front of her with a cup of coffee and some bread and butter. "Why didn't Bian bring you any buckwheat cakes?" Jim asked. "I'll go get some for you right now." "Your mother has a bad headache," said his father sternly. "She doesn't want any buckwheat cakes. Now run along and don't interrupt us." "But, Father, I have to interrupt. It's something very important. It's bad news. A letter from Virginia with a wide black border all around it." "I'm afraid it's true," said Mrs. Best softly. "Poor Matilda. Her stepfather must have died. Of course, we must ask her to come stay with us at once." "Of course not," her husband replied sharply. "You're in no condition to receive visitors. It's been many years since I've seen Matilda. She means nothing to me." "Nothing? But she's your half-sister," Mrs. Best said, surprised. Jim was now sure that this Matilda person must be quite disagreeable if his father didn't even want to speak about her. He also thought Matilda Dowdap was the ugliest name he had ever heard. His mother's name, Sadie, was the prettiest of all, just like his sister's name. But the next best name, Jim thought, was Evelyn. Evelyn had been curled up at the foot of their mother's bed. Jim hadn't seen her at first, as the footboard was a solid piece of mahogany that had hidden her from view. Evelyn had dark eyes like their mother, but her hair was light. In the sunshine, Jim thought it looked as if it were made of gold. She had some tiny cups and saucers scattered across the bed and began placing them carefully along the edge of their mother's tray. "Can Sarah and Matilda have their breakfast now?" asked Evelyn, offering her pretend tea to her two dolls. Then she looked up and saw her mother's very serious face. Poor Matilda," said Mrs. Best gently. Mr. Best was still reading the letter, giving small grunts as he went along. "I don't see why she wants to come to us this summer," he said. "I've told you, you're not well enough to have a visitor. Why can't she stay where she's been living for the past 10 years? "But, Terence," said Mrs. Best, "of course she stayed with her father. How could she have done anything else? She had better stay on in Virginia, where everyone knows her," he muttered. "Yes," chimed in Jim. "She had better stay in Virginia, where everyone knows her." "You little pitcher," said Mr. Best, half laughing. "Go downstairs where you belong. What do you know about it? You've never lived in Virginia. You were born here." Little Evelyn looked up and said thoughtfully, "Sarah Matilda is a great aunt, isn't she? She had a father, and now he's gone." She seemed very solemn as she slid down from the bed and climbed into her father's lap. She didn't fully understand the sadness, but she could feel it in the room. She knew her father wasn't angry. He was just worried about her mother. "My little pigeon," said Mr. Best as he gently stroked her golden hair. "You are my little comfort." Evelyn put one chubby arm around his neck and held him tight. Mr. Best finished reading the letter and handed it to his wife. "If you're not strong enough to have her here, Sadie, we can easily find her a boarding place," he said. "You see, she even suggests that herself. Poor thing. She writes that her few years have been blue as indigo. It would be hard for you with the children." Evelyn had never seen a blue person before. She had seen several black people, and she remembered how yellow her mother had looked when she had jaundice. She wondered if Aunt Matilda had some very strange disease. If so, Evelyn thought, she would have to be very, very good to her to make up for it. Mrs. Best was quietly crying over the letter. "It's very pathetic," she whispered. "She says she wants to be near some of her own people again." "Oh, all right, Sadie. We'll ask her to come stay with us for the summer." Mr. Best sighed. "It shouldn't be a long visit. She says she has other plans for autumn." "Terence, you're always so cold. I see so little of her as it is. She grew up with me. I do know her, even if you don't," said Mrs. Best. "She doesn't suggest coming for more than a fortnight." "That wouldn't be decent, Sadie. We must ask her for at least a month." That afternoon, the day the letter arrived, Jim and Evelyn were building a blockhouse in the nursery. "What color is indigo blue?" Evelyn asked Jim. "It's a dark, ugly shade of blue," he said. "Poor Aunt Matilda." "I guess she's a pretty horrible person," said Jim. "Father seems to hate her." "But she's your mother's sister. She's nice. I don't think anyone would be hateful," Evelyn said seriously, "if they had a disease that made them turn that shade of blue." Jim threw back his head and chuckled. "Well, you do beat the Dutch," he said, laughing. "You'd have to be very, very good to her," Evelyn insisted. Their heads were green. They had put toy helmets on, and their hands were blue from the paints they had been playing with. They went to see if they could find more blocks for their castle. "Look out," said Jim. "Don't get any more blocks from that drawer. They're written on. If you do, Mother'll be mad." Evelyn continued to stack the blocks as if she hadn't heard. "Are you deaf?" asked her brother impatiently. "Of course I am," said Evelyn calmly. "When I want to put on blocks, I put on blocks. Didn't I just tell you not to? Look at what you've done." "I didn't look at the rest of the castle. I didn't think it would tumble down. And it hasn't tumbled down. We'll put it up again. You are a perfectly aggravating child. You always think you know best and you never get anything right." "If I were indigo blue, would you hate me?" asked Evelyn suddenly, her voice soft. "Oh, Evelyn," Jim sighed. "Well, would you hate me?" she asked again, looking up at him with her big brown eyes. "Of course I don't hate you," said Jim. "But sometimes you are enough to try the patience of Job." "Who is Job?" Evelyn asked, puzzled. "Is he someone you know?" "What questions you ask? I think he was a Bible chap anyway." "It's just an expression Father uses a lot." "I'm going to build a house of my own this time," said Evelyn, picking up more blocks. "I can build it anywhere I like. And then I'm going to make a husband for our children and me to live in." Jim interrupted with a laugh. "You mean a house, not a husband." Evelyn giggled, but went on. "One room will be for Sarah, Matilda, and me. Another will be for the Blue Ant when she comes. And you won't be allowed in at all." "I don't want to come in your old house anyway," Jim said with a huff. "And I think Aunt Sarah is a perfect fright. Mother says she's very sweet and has fluffy hair, but you'd better stay away from the Blue Ant or she might give you the disease." End of chapter 1.